No one really noticed her at first. She wasn't loud. She didn't crave the spotlight. To most, she was just a soft-spoken woman who spent her time organizing food drives, collecting clothes, and quietly raising funds for distant causes. Some even rolled their eyes, calling her efforts cute or too small to matter. But what they didn't see, what they refused to believe, was that behind her calm smile was a fierce determination. And one day, that quiet kindness would do what no one thought possible: save an entire village. She didn't wear designer suits or make dramatic speeches. Her name wasn't trending on social media. But while others were busy chasing fame, she was building something real, one act of compassion at a time. The truth is, she wasn't just helping people, she was changing lives. Still, no one paid attention. That is, until a crisis hit. A forgotten village, cut off from help, left without food, clean water, or medical care. It was too remote, too risky, too hopeless. But not for her. While others hesitated, she stepped forward, not with noise, but with action. Not with promises, but with plans. And slowly, what seemed impossible began to shift. People who once dismissed her started asking questions. How did she do it? Why did she care so much? And could one woman really turn the tide where others had failed? What happened next shocked everyone: leaders, critics, even her own supporters. Because just when the situation seemed beyond saving, she made one bold move that changed everything. But before we reveal how she did it, you need to know what she faced, and why this moment became the turning point in a story no one saw coming. Her name was Amara. She didn't come from wealth, power, or fame. In fact, she'd grown up in a small town herself, where she'd learned early on that even the smallest act of kindness could make a big difference. Over the years, she built a quiet reputation, helping the elderly, feeding the hungry, raising money for distant causes. But nothing she'd done before could prepare her for what was coming. The village in need wasn't even on most maps. Tucked between dry mountains and forgotten roads, it had been hit by a severe drought. Crops failed, the river dried up, and diseases began to spread. The government sent reports, but no real help. Aid organizations marked it too remote or low priority. People were getting sick. Children were starving. The village was slowly disappearing. That's when Amara heard about it, through a whisper in a community meeting, a name she hadn't heard before. Most would have ignored it, but something about the story pulled at her. She began asking questions, reading reports, reaching out to anyone who might have answers. What she found was heartbreaking. Dozens of families, isolated, with no supplies, no access to clean water, and no real hope. Still, no one believed she could help. It's too far, they said. Too dangerous. You don't have the resources. Even those close to her urged her to focus on more realistic goals. But Amara didn't back down. She started small, contacting local volunteers, collecting donations, planning supply routes. But the deeper she got, the more resistance she faced. Permits were denied, shipments delayed, roads blocked. It was as if someone didn't want her to reach the village at all. And just as she was getting closer, something unexpected happened, something that changed everything and forced her to make an impossible choice. The moment Amara's plan started gaining momentum, new problems began to surface, quiet, subtle, but enough to slow her down. A key sponsor suddenly pulled out, citing logistical concerns. A shipment of medical supplies mysteriously went missing. Even the driver she trusted backed out last minute, saying someone had warned him to stay away from the route. Amara began to realize it wasn't just about bad luck. Someone didn't want help reaching that village. Still, she pressed on. She turned to grassroots support, local shopkeepers, students, neighbors. People who had once doubted her now started offering whatever they could. Old trucks, second-hand clothes, water filters, energy bars. It wasn't much, but it was something. She coordinated with a retired doctor who offered to come along. A former military nurse volunteered too. Slowly, a small team came together. But with every step forward, the pushback grew stronger. Then came the warnings: anonymous messages, late-night calls, subtle threats. "Turn around while you still can," one note read. But Amara wasn't afraid. What worried her more was what the village might be facing that no one was willing to talk about. Meanwhile, the villagers themselves were losing hope. One of the elders, speaking through a scratchy phone line, told her that children were growing weaker and the water had turned unsafe to drink. He begged for help, but sounded like he'd already given up. That call haunted her, and as she prepared to set out for the final leg of the journey, across rocky terrain and unstable roads, she received unexpected news. One of her closest allies had disappeared without a word. No messages, no signs, just gone. Now Amara was left with a critical decision: move forward and risk everything, or turn back and abandon the people who needed her most. The sun was barely up when Amara climbed into the back of a battered pickup truck, her bag filled with only the essentials: first aid kits, water filters, dried food, and a notebook of scribbled contacts. The small convoy behind her included 2 vans and a single motorbike, all packed with supplies. It wasn't much compared to what larger charities could deliver, but this was all they had. And this time, there was no turning back. The road was worse than they'd imagined. Deep cracks split the dirt path, and landslides had narrowed some stretches to little more than ledges. Every bump rattled the bones. Every turn came with the fear that the truck might tip. Still, Amara stayed focused. She kept thinking of the elder's voice, the sick children, the fear in every call she'd received from the village. That was her fuel. Halfway through the route, the motorbike stalled, a van's engine overheated, and then the radio silence hit. One by one, their phones and walkies lost signal. It was as if they had entered a dead zone. With no way to call for help, the tension inside the truck thickened. Every mile forward felt like walking blind into something none of them fully understood. Then they saw it, black smoke rising in the distance. Amara's heart sank. The driver looked back at her, waiting for a command, but she didn't speak. She just stared ahead. Was it a fire? A warning? Or something worse? As they got closer, the air turned heavy. The land looked burned in patches, like something, or someone, had tried to erase the path they were on. They were only a few miles from the village now, and that's when they heard it, a sound none of them expected. Not cries for help, but something far more chilling. It wasn't crying, it wasn't shouting. What they heard was singing, soft, eerie, almost like a chant carried by the wind. It didn't match the chaos they were expecting. Amara's team slowed down, exchanging confused glances. The smoke still rose in the distance, but the strange melody grew louder. It wasn't joyful, it was haunting. Something was off. They stopped the truck near a patch of scorched earth, too dangerous to drive across. Amara and 2 others moved ahead on foot, stepping carefully over burnt branches and abandoned shoes. As they climbed a hill overlooking the village, they finally saw it, but it wasn't what they'd prepared for. The village wasn't abandoned, it was occupied. A group of unknown men had set up camp in the center, armed and alert, guarding stockpiles of supplies that clearly didn't belong to them. Tents with unfamiliar markings were scattered across the village square. The singing, it turned out, came from a group of frightened villagers being forced to perform, likely as some twisted form of control. Amara ducked down, heart pounding. This wasn't just a crisis, it was a takeover. She quickly scanned the area and recognized something even worse. Some of the stolen supplies, they were hers. Boxes marked with her organization's logo. Her missing shipment hadn't vanished. It had been intercepted and used to control the very people she was trying to save. Her mind raced. Who were these men? And how did they know exactly when and where her aid was going? The realization hit her hard. Someone from her inner circle had betrayed her. That's why her ally had disappeared. That's why her permits were blocked. This wasn't just about charity anymore. It was personal. And now every move she made could cost lives. Amara crouched behind a fallen tree, her breath shallow as she watched the village below. Fear gripped her, but she knew turning back wasn't an option. These people needed her, and whoever had betrayed her needed to be exposed. Quietly, she signaled to her team. They split up, using the terrain to stay hidden as they closed in. It was the nurse, Lena, who made the first move. She crept to a high point and sent a coded signal through a backup radio no one else knew they had. Within minutes, a local rescue contact Amara had met months earlier responded. He'd been waiting for a sign, suspicious of the delays and interference. What Amara didn't know was that he'd been tracking the same group, smugglers posing as aid workers, stealing resources from isolated villages. The authorities arrived faster than expected, helicopters circling overhead, scattering the men below. Some tried to flee, others dropped their weapons and surrendered. The villagers ran for cover, confused and terrified, but finally, help had come. Amara rushed into the square, hugging the elder she had spoken to on the phone. He could barely speak, but his eyes said everything. Her supplies were recovered. Her team, though shaken, was safe. And the missing ally? He reappeared, held captive all along after uncovering too much. His return confirmed what Amara feared. Someone inside her own network had been feeding information to the smugglers. As the dust settled and aid finally flowed freely, Amara stood in silence. She had saved the village. Her quiet charity had done what big names hadn't. But just as she turned to leave, a young boy handed her a folded note. Inside were just 4 words, scrawled in shaky handwriting. Asterisk, this isn't over yet, asterisk. Amara stared at the note in her hand for a long time. The words were simple, but they carried weight. She knew this wasn't just about one village. It was a warning, a reminder that even in the world of charity, where the goal is to help and heal, corruption can find its way in. But she also knew one more thing: it wouldn't stop her. In the days that followed, the village began to recover. Clean water flowed again, thanks to the filters her team had brought. A temporary clinic was set up with the help of the rescued doctor and nurse. Children who had once grown too weak to stand began smiling again. The villagers started rebuilding, not just their homes, but their spirit. For them, Amara wasn't just someone who brought supplies, she brought hope. News of what happened spread quietly through humanitarian circles. Some organizations reached out, offering to collaborate. Others stayed silent, afraid to admit they'd ignored the villagers' cries for help. Amara didn't care about the recognition. What mattered to her was that people finally listened. She launched a new initiative focused on protecting remote communities from exploitation, partnering with ethical aid groups and creating safe reporting channels. Her quiet charity had grown into a movement, fueled not by fame, but by truth. As for the boy who handed her the note, he became her first youth ambassador, helping other children find their voice. The smuggler network was exposed, but whispers of its reach still echoed in nearby regions. Amara knew there would be more challenges, more villages, more battles, but she was ready. Because the world had underestimated her once. Now they knew better. She didn't just deliver aid, she delivered change. And sometimes that's what it takes to save a village, and maybe, one day, the world.